One of the most important questions we can ask ourselves in life is also one of the most uncomfortable. Who are you really? Not the version of yourself you show to the world, not the one shaped by expectations, roles, or achievements, but the core of you, the why behind your actions, your choices, your relationships. The problem is, many people don't know how to answer this question. They know what they do, they know how they do it. But ask them why they are the way they are, ask them who they really are, and you'll find that most people have spent more time crafting their image than discovering their identity. Today, we're going to slow down and confront the question that drives purpose, connection, and legacy. Because until you understand who you are, everything you build will be unstable. Identity isn't something we inherit, it's something we uncover. So let's start there. Your true identity is not what you do, it's the reason you exist. Most people confuse identity with occupation. They say things like, I'm a teacher, I'm an entrepreneur, or I'm a parent. And while those are roles they play, they're not the essence of who they are. What you do may change. Roles shift, jobs come and go, seasons evolve. But your identity, when you understand it, is consistent. It's rooted in your why. It's the deeper narrative that drives every decision, every relationship, every dream. And yet, so few people take the time to understand it. They spend years perfecting what they do, but never stop to examine why they do it. When we confuse identity with function, we set ourselves up for an identity crisis the moment circumstances shift. A person who has built their entire sense of self around their job will feel lost the day they get laid off. Someone who bases their worth on being needed will feel empty when the people around them grow independent. That's the danger of a misplaced identity. It's fragile, it's reactive. But when your identity is built on the reason you exist, on your purpose, you can navigate change without losing yourself. You can evolve without erasing who you are. Understanding your identity means understanding your impact. It means knowing what problem you're uniquely designed to solve in the world and what presence you carry that no one else can replicate. We all have gifts, we all have strengths, but those are the tools, not the foundation. The foundation is purpose, and purpose starts with clarity. When you know why you're here, you stop chasing approval and start trying to contribute. Because your focus shifts from success to significance. Purpose-driven people have a different posture. They're not the loudest in the room, but they're the most rooted. They're not driven by ego, but by service. They don't perform, they live, and they do so with intention. That kind of identity creates resilience. Because when life hits hard, and it always will, people who are anchored in purpose bend, but they don't break. They may feel pressure, but they don't lose direction. Because they've built their identity not on what the world gave them, but on what they were born to give to the world. The most important step in discovering who you are is asking better questions. Instead of, what do I want to be when I grow up? Ask, what breaks my heart that I feel called to fix? Instead of, how can I succeed? Ask, how can I serve in a way that reflects who I am? The answers to those questions will point you to your real identity. Not the version that's curated, not the version shaped by resume, titles, or income, but the version of you that was there before any of those things existed. That's the version the world needs. That's the version with something irreplaceable to offer. In a culture that constantly tells us to brand ourselves, finding our true identity means stepping away from the noise. It means sitting with the silence long enough to hear our own voice. Not the voice that mimics others, not the voice that plays it safe, but the voice that's honest. Sometimes that voice is buried under fear, under trauma, under performance, but it's there. It's the voice that remembers what made you come alive as a child. It's the voice that still whispers in moments of stillness. It's the reason you were born. Society teaches performance. Purpose demands authenticity. From the moment we're old enough to be measured, We are taught to perform, get the good grades, land the right job, build the impressive resume, say the right things, post the curated life. We learn early that affirmation follows performance, that applause comes when we achieve. And so we start to believe that our worth is something we earn. We start performing not just in school or at work, but in our friendships, our families. We craft versions of ourselves we think people will accept. But the problem with performance is that it's exhausting, it's unsustainable, and over time it disconnects us from who we really are. You can only pretend for so long before the cracks begin to show. The smile feels heavy, the conversations become shallow, the days start to blur together. That's the cost of performance-driven identity. You can be celebrated and still feel invisible. You can be successful and still feel like a stranger to yourself. Because performance may earn attention, but only authenticity builds connection. And purpose is always rooted in connection, first with yourself, then with others, and ultimately with something bigger than both. We live in a culture that teaches us to chase image over identity. We're rewarded for how well we fit the mold, not how true we are to our calling. But living for likes is not the same as living with meaning. And if we don't question the system shaping our values, we risk building entire lives around expectations that were never ours to begin with. That's why so many people achieve their goals only to feel lost at the finish line, because they are performing their way to someone else's version of success, and no amount of external achievement can fix the internal disconnect of misalignment. Purpose starts where performance ends. It begins the moment you stop asking, "What will they think?" and start asking, "What am I here for?" That shift is powerful. It doesn't mean you stop showing up. It means you start showing up differently. You lead from your values, not your fears. You speak with your real voice, not the one filtered for approval. You start choosing alignment over applause. And yes, it's risky. Authenticity always is. But what you gain is far more valuable than what you lose. You gain integrity. You gain peace. You gain the ability to look at yourself and say, "I know who I am and I know why I'm here." Purpose doesn't require you to be perfect. It requires you to be real. That's a radical idea in a world where vulnerability is often mistaken for weakness. But the truth is, people are not inspired by your performance. They're inspired by your courage, by your honesty. They're inspired when they see someone living a life that matches their values, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. Because that's what leadership really is. It's not about being the best in the room. It's about being the most real. And when you choose to live authentically, you give others permission to do the same. Every time you choose authenticity over performance, you reinforce your true identity. You begin to attract what is aligned and repel what is false. You begin to build relationships rooted in truth, not transaction. You stop hustling for belonging and start standing in it. And that's the environment where purpose can grow. Because purpose doesn't grow in pretending. It grows in honesty, in self-awareness, in stillness, and in the daily, sometimes difficult decision to live according to your why, not someone else's expectations. Society may teach you to perform, but you don't have to obey that script. You can rewrite the narrative. You can trade performance for presence. You can live a life that isn't just impressive, but impactful. And it all starts with a decision to be honest with yourself, even when it's easier not to be, a decision to ask not, "How do I look?" but "Am I aligned with who I really am?" Without a clear why, success becomes empty and directionless. We're taught to chase success almost instinctively. From a young age, we're asked what we want to do, not who we want to be. And so we start climbing ladders, any ladder, really, as long as it promises some kind of reward. We pursue the next promotion, the next achievement, the next milestone. But what happens when we get there and feel nothing? What happens when the applause fades and the silence that follows feels louder than we expected? That silence is often the echo of an unanswered question. Why am I doing this in the first place? Success without purpose is like running at full speed in the wrong direction. You might look productive. You might be admired for your work ethic or your accomplishments, but deep down, something feels off. That's not because you're doing something wrong. It's because you're disconnected from the reason you started. Or maybe you never truly asked the question. A clear why gives meaning to the struggle. It gives context to the sacrifice. Without it, you can accumulate wins and still feel like you're losing something essential. Purpose is what transforms effort into legacy. It's the invisible thread that weaves meaning into everything we do. It doesn't make the hard days disappear, but it makes them worth it. When you're clear on your why, you can endure setbacks without losing hope. You can handle success without losing humility. You're not swayed by trends or distracted by comparison because you're guided by something internal, not external. And in a world that constantly tries to pull us in 1,000 directions, that kind of clarity is not just valuable, it's vital. The danger of a missing why is not just burnout, it's disconnection. You wake up, go through the motions, achieve what others might call success, but feel more like a machine than a human. You start asking questions like, is this all there is? Or why doesn't this feel as good as I thought it would? These questions aren't signs of weakness, they're invitations to realign. They're reminders that achievement is empty if it isn't anchored in something deeper. Because true fulfillment comes not from doing more, but from doing what matters. And what matters is different for everyone. That's why comparison is such a trap. You can't adopt someone else's why and expect it to give you purpose. It has to be yours. It has to come from your story, your values, your pain, your passion. That's what gives it power. Your why doesn't need to be flashy. It doesn't have to be grand. It just has to be true, because once you discover it, everything begins to shift. Decisions become clearer. Direction becomes focused. You stop asking, what should I do? And start asking, does this align with my why? There's a certain kind of confidence that comes from living on purpose. It's not loud. It's not about bravado or control. It's quiet. It's steady. It's the kind of confidence that doesn't need to prove itself because it knows what it stands for. And when you carry that kind of clarity, you don't chase success, you attract it. You create impact not just through what you do, but through who you are. That's when work becomes more than work. That's when leadership becomes legacy. A clear why also makes you resilient, because when you know what you're fighting for, you can keep going long after motivation fades. You're not dependent on ideal circumstances or external rewards. You're fueled by something deeper, something that lasts, something that leads you even when the path ahead isn't fully visible. That's what makes purpose a compass. It doesn't always show you the entire map, but it keeps you pointed in the right direction. And that's often all you need to keep moving forward with conviction and peace. Knowing who you are gives you the courage to say no to what you're not. Most people think identity is about addition, adding skills, adding accomplishments, adding titles. But the truth is, the most powerful clarity often comes through subtraction, through letting go of the roles, labels, and expectations that never truly belong to you. When you know who you are, you stop saying yes out of guilt. You stop agreeing out of fear. You stop adapting to environments that were never meant to nurture your growth. And instead, you start making decisions that align with your values, not just your opportunities. There's a myth in our culture that says more is better. More hustle, more visibility, more yes. But more doesn't equal meaning. More doesn't equal alignment. In fact, constantly saying yes can water down your impact. Because every time you say yes to something that's not aligned, you say no to something that could have been. You dilute your energy, you scatter your focus. But when you're grounded in who you are, when your identity is anchored, you learn to say no with confidence, not apology. No becomes an act of leadership. It becomes a way of protecting your purpose. Saying no doesn't mean you're closed-minded. It means you're clear. It means you're no longer making decisions from insecurity, you're making them from identity. And that's one of the most courageous things you can do in a world that's constantly asking for your attention, your agreement, your compliance. The more clarity you have around who you are, the less you feel the need to prove yourself. You don't chase every opportunity because you recognize that not every opportunity is for you. Some things are distractions, dressed as options. But when you know yourself, you can spot the difference. Clarity creates boundaries. And boundaries are not about keeping people out. They're about keeping you aligned. They help you protect the space you need to grow, to think, to create, to rest. And rest is important because identity is not forged in burnout. It's forged in reflection. It's in the quiet moments that you begin to recognize what fits and what doesn't. And that's when discernment becomes one of your greatest assets. You begin to ask, not is this good, but is this good for me? That question changes everything. We often admire people for their achievements, but we connect with them through their integrity, through their ability to be consistent. Same person on the stage, at home, in the boardroom, behind the scenes. That level of consistency comes from knowing who you are. And to maintain it, you have to be willing to disappoint some people. You have to be okay with being misunderstood, because every time you choose authenticity, you risk rejection, but the cost of not choosing it is far greater. You may gain approval, but you lose yourself. And the longer you perform a role that isn't yours, the harder it becomes to remember the original version of you. The courage to say no to what you're not is what gives strength to your yes. Your yes becomes focused, intentional, powerful, because it's no longer about pleasing others. It's about pursuing purpose. That's what makes a life meaningful. Not how much you did, but how aligned you were with what mattered most. When you live like that, you don't just make noise, you make impact. You don't just move fast, you move with purpose. And you begin to attract the kind of people, opportunities, and momentum that only come when you're walking in truth. Indoctrination is not just about understanding who you are, it's about honoring it. And honoring it requires discipline. It requires patience. It requires the strength to walk away from what looks good in order to wait for what's truly right. That's not easy. But it's how you build a life that's not only successful on the outside, but whole on the inside. Because ultimately, identity is not found in what you gain. It's revealed by what you're willing to walk away from.